Is Ret Paladin broken? Is it the most OP melee in the game? Judging by the comments in our videos, it quite is. But luckily today we have Bolas, first of all, the wallhead guide writer for Retribution Palette. Second of all, one of the spearheads of the Hammer of Red Discord in terms of Retribution Palette, an absolute legend who I think has helped us with our Ret Paladin guides, and specifically my Ret Paladin gameplay improvement for like years and years. Absolute blast of a person. Did we miss anything, Bolas?
I didn't think so. I think you
I
you got everything
also
there.
saw him in Max's streams whenever Max did his tier list videos. I think he got Bolas a couple of times on the streams over there as well. Without further ado, you wanted to say something, man?
No.
I'm excited.
It's all good. I'm still uninitiated in Red, although I have played the new rework, and I have to say it's annoyingly fun. It's just, obviously we have to have a little bit of diverse content, so I didn't put it as a priority to play it because Marcelian is also maining it, so it would be just a little bit awkward, but it is a fun spec. So I probably have some noob questions that I'll probably shoot across the discussion, but I'll let you guys talk about it most. And it's going to be chill, whatever topics you feel like we need to cover, Bolas. If there's something that you want to say, feel free to do it. We could just start it off, I guess.
Yeah, we're starting it off.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I think I've heard Bolas saying that Retribution Paladin is his all-time favorite spec of all time. We're gonna kick it off slowly and get to the meat of it gradually. So what do you like about the Retribution Paladin, my man? Let's start it off like with the general stuff.
Oh, that's a hard one to say specifically. I think it's sort of changed a little bit as I've played the game. Like at the start, I was like, oh, I want to play a melee that can also like heal and stuff like that, right? But that was like when I first picked up the game, like way back in the day.
Boy.
Old school.
But I guess having like a lot of options for like group support stuff and like buffs and all that kind of thing was really cool back then. And then now it's just playing the class is very fun. Just like the rotational feeling is great. You always feel like you're blasting. Yeah, it's just
and also
I don't know, something about it that just appeals to me.
Also on that note, speaking of like feeling your blasting, I think that the abilities now in general feel like they have a lot more impact. It doesn't feel like you're always pressing some fillers spells until something big comes up. Everything has a lot of impact, but we'll get to that. I guess it's the same when I talk with like main Red Paladins. It's always more or less the same stories. Like when they first looked at the Paladin description, and the class that can DPS and also heal others and help out others and stuff. There was all that multi-packaging into one. So I definitely like. Get the appeal from back in the day. Just moving on to the present day. Do you feel that the rotation of Red Paladin and everything that comes with it, priority and all that, do you feel they simplified this? Is it like a little bit more catered now to like
with like the most recent rework?
The rework, yeah. How do you feel on that?
Yeah, pretty like it's definitely. There was before the rework, like just before, like at the very start of Dragonflight, there was a bunch of abilities and buttons that felt a little bit superfluous. Like they didn't really help your rotation very much. Like just having to hardcast Consecrate, having to like press the Exorcism. A lot of people really hated that ability and just like wouldn't even talent into it because they'd press it so infrequently. Stuff like that. It was just like it didn't feel satisfying to press, and it didn't really serve your rotation like much at all. They just kind of like did damage. I like getting rid of those kind of things, giving you ways to like remove Consecration altogether with Consecrated Blade with the rework. That kind of stuff I think was a massive improvement.
That's true. I was just asking because I think back in Shadowlands, I'm not sure if it was during the 1 minute build era or around that time, but I think that was one of the times where Red had one of the highest APLs. Like in all of them, I don't know if all the classes.
Like in terms of like individual buttons
exactly.
you press for your rotation.
A lot of
I remember
stuff.
that.
Like the sequencing and the things you had to do to actually, I would dare call it like ramp up and get prepped to have everything working properly was just out as well. some people enjoy that.
I did.
Yeah, me included. Some people hated it, as we saw in the comments, right? So there's not always a perfect way to please everybody.
I think Red underwent some very interesting changes from BFA, where it was a little bit bland in terms of like what it was doing, like how you felt during the gameplay, while the 1 minute build added a lot of flavor to it. But it felt like, at least for an average noob Red Paladin, Red looked way better than it actually felt with all of the cool animations. And I think now, I'm pretty sure most of the animations have been improved as well. But Red just feels good, not just looks good, because we always kind of compared the overall aesthetics, whether it's through the media abilities or the animations with Shaman. Enhancement / Elemental, because usually Enhancement Elemental Shamans had like the best spell effects, audio effects, you hear the ground. But now, I don't know, man. Red is just looking like a bomb ready to blast, and I love it. I think it's probably one of the best versions of Red that I have personally played.
Took a minute. I mean,
it's also like the feeling of pressing the buttons themselves. Like before the rework, when you'd press Crusader Strike, you would just feel like all this ability did was just generate a holy power. It did like no damage. But if you're running 10+ strikes, it actually does a significant amount of damage as well. It's like, okay, I'm not just pressing this button and all it's doing is generating a holy power. I'm actually doing like a lot of damage. Even in like an AoE situation with Blizzard Champion, you're still like, okay, I'm pressing this button and it's like hitting everything around me for, not an insignificant amount as well. It's just they basically managed to get rid of all the buttons that felt like not impactful at all to press, that you sort of just had to press rotationally frequently, and just made you press the ones that feel really good to press way more often, which is, it's a great change.
That is true. I cannot not help but remember all of our chats in previous podcasts on the Mokesh channel with Red Paladin, and we tried to like pick your guys' brains out on like, hey, what can they do to improve it? And I know for a fact there was always this talk of either a button bloat or just abilities that don't feel good to press. And this was an issue for Paladins. I remember specifically talking about Consecration. And we always like hated the fact that they pushed the Consecration thing on Red Paladins because it's such an iconic ability for Red Paladins. It wasn't really for Reds. I mean, it was more prot, and nobody loved pressing Consecration. It was such an outdated spell. I still feel it is, although right now it's fine. It's just passively just throwing it out there. Don't need to press it actively. I guess they kind of put up a little bit of an ear to like people writing feedback. I know Bolas gave a lot of feedback on the forums, people making videos and stuff like that. But it was a little bit concerning at the start of Dragonflight, because the initial iteration of the talents in Dragonflight were a little bit disappointing. It was more or less the Shadowlands version of it, but felt a little bit more gimped. I think Bolas underlined it pretty good. With
there were a couple of things that I wasn't a big fan of with the first versions. There's like a bunch of talents that they had made that were basically just conduits that they took from Shadowlands and just added to the new talent tree. Stuff like Timbar's Vindication or like Virtuous Command, stuff like that. But they were basically just passive damage increases. They didn't, really add anything to the spec. It was just sort of like, your spenders will do a little bit more damage effectively. And it was like, okay, I understand, that they need to have stuff to add to the tree, but like it didn't really like add anything to the spec. The talents were not like super interesting. You ran effectively the same build for every situation. Like you would swap like 1 or 2 talents to go from a full single target build to a full AoE build and nothing else. It was just it's definitely like a spec you could tell that wasn't completely finished the development by the time that the game came out.
Sure. It felt like that. I had no problem with the like ultimate Shadowlands build, like before Dragonflight or whatever. I had no problem, but I was expecting more due to the talents, right? And it just felt like they copy pasted a lot of this stuff from Shadowlands, but it felt way more gimped, right? It wasn't like the full on let's say toy set to play with. But
it felt like at the beginning of Dragonflight, because we went through everything through beta, Paladin was probably one of the worst stuff in terms of overall designs, general class tree, and Red as well. together with Prod and Holy, and lo and behold, all of them are getting reworks as well. But I think now probably Red, even more so than Prod, even though I'm mostly a Prod Paladin player, I think it's probably the best example of how they modernize WoW, and the best is probably with Consecration, with how they're doing with Searing Light and Consecrated Blade and all of that stuff. I feel like all of the boring spells, because they do this with other classes as well, they just bake them into effects, and you still have the identities like, okay, you want Red to deal so much damage, it's burning the ground up and people are taking damage. Do that through like passive stuff, and I think that's a really cool thing. And I think Red, although they reworked a bunch of stuff and did a lot of stuff, I think Red is probably the first step into a more modern WoW in terms of gameplay, in terms of design, in terms of effects, and all of that cool stuff. And it's great. I can see all the Paladins laughing all over the place, and hey, doing some damage too.
Speaking of Consecration, I was pretty happy when they put in the Divine Hammer talent, although it doesn't see much play at all. Wanted to pick your brain a little bit here, Bolas, regarding the Divine Hammer. I was initially excited because I kind of loved it in Legion, to be honest. It was very good cleave. It doesn't feel. Do you think it's just a numbers game at this point, or do you think there's something else going on in the background for Divine Hammer?
It's mostly just numbers. Like you don't really want to have an extra button that you have to press to use it when you can just press like your regular rotation abilities and they all cleave anyway. But like, between different talents.
True.
So it doesn't really make sense to just add an extra button that does AoE damage, but that also, doesn't really give you much of a benefit, right? Like it doesn't generate holy power. It doesn't, do that much damage. If it did a lot more damage, maybe you'd see it run, or if it generated holy power as well. But like with the Crusader Strikes, maybe it'd be a thing. But yeah, it's just getting a free passive benefit. Like when your rotation is already can be pretty hard to fill your buttons in, is a lot better.
Yeah, I think like, okay, so you heard it here first, Blizzard. Generate some holy power from it and bump up its damage. Should be fine. Because visually, I always loved it. But just having like a little spinning hammer around and cleaving everything around, it was cool. But yeah, I mean,
I love playing it in Legion.
It was pretty good in Legion. It's just okay, we're obviously nitpicking here. There's still a couple of issues that we can talk about with Bolas regarding the Ret Paladin tree or whatever. You still have some dead talents, and I think Divine Hammer is one of them, because like nobody kind of picks it, and I think it's kind of logic why that is to happen. What are your thoughts on Justicar Vengeance? I know you felt it.
This is the person to go to whenever that sounds like. I saw. I don't know when was this added, but I remember back in the classic days when I used to play, where it's like, oh, this sounded really cool, this sword thing or whatever. But it's just,
it always felt like a PvP talent.
But they keep putting it into PvE talent, so I'm like a little bit confused. What are they trying to accomplish with this? And I think it says replaces. Never mind.
It's basically just, it's like a choice node where either one of them you pick is just your single target spender now, right? So either you pick Final Verdict or Justicar's Vengeance, and that's your single target spender instead of Templar's Verdict.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like it's hard to justify it for most PvE situations because it's just a strict damage loss compared to Final Verdict, like both in terms of the initial damage it does, and then also like the Hammer of Wrath recast that Final Verdict gives you. I mean, I don't really hate that it exists now, just because you can, like, PvPers still will use it. Like, it's not, the game isn't just for us PvE guys. Like, there's also a bunch of other people that play it. So I'm not like mad that it exists. In terms of, it's not going to be picked for us. It probably has its place, like, for other players, and that's fine.
I remember even back in the day, like I think they introduced it in Legion, and it wasn't picked too much in PvP either. I had played a lot of more PvP back then.
No,
maybe now.
Well, the problem back then was like it was 5 holy power cost, right? Whereas now it's like just a regular holy power spender, and it does a regular amount of damage as well. Back then it would be like you'd spend 5 holy power on it, and it would do less damage than your Templar's Verdict. It just like, it made zero sense to ever use it. And people would just get baited into picking it because they see it costs 5 holy power, it must do more damage.
Yeah, that would be like the logical interpretation of it for sure. I know when 10.1 released, Reds had a lot of bugs. And sometimes this tends to happen. We draw the unlucky card. There was other specs with buggy situations, with tier sets and some talents. Not. I think there's still a bug with execution sentence. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because there's the versatility component of it not being taken into account. I don't know exactly the technicalities of it. Maybe you can shed some light.
Yeah, I can explain it. So first of all, I think with the rework, they actually did a really good job with getting rid of most of the bugs. There was like a lot of bugs early on in the rework, and they fixed like almost all of them. This versatility bug actually happened a couple weeks after the spec like rework launched, because when they changed how it interacts with like the Razageth shield and stuff like that, where you'd previously be getting like 3 million damage execution sentence in the second phase with the damage buff, they changed that so that you'd get like just a regular damage buff. But then at the same time, they kind of messed up how versatility applies. So how it works in the game right now, if you cast a spell that says it does 10,000 damage base and you have 20% versatility, so it gets buffed to 12,000 damage, right? You'd expect 30% of that to get added to your execution sentence, but it doesn't add 30% of 12,000. It subtracts the versatility amount before it adds it to the execution sentence. So it will do 30% of 10,000 instead. So instead of like doing 3,600 damage added to your execution sentence, it'll be 3k. So if you have more versatility, you effectively like lose some more execution sentence damage. It's a bit weird. And it's not like an issue of like double dipping or anything, because versatility doesn't apply to your final execution sentence hit either. It's just straight up, the versatility does not impact your execution sentence damage at all. It's just like removed from any spells that get added to it. Does that explanation make sense?
I totally understand it, but this still is considered a bug, right? This still.
Oh yeah, no, it's absolutely a bug. Like it's not adding the total like amount of damage that it should be from any of your abilities.
Maybe some people will take out of this that they would not go for versatility anymore. Obviously, the best way is to sim, but versatility is still one of the strongest stats for Retribution Paladins.
Yeah. It's a relatively like it definitely does diminish versatility a little bit, but it's not to the point where the stat that we thought was really good is now like really bad. It's like, okay, the stat that we thought was really good is now pretty good, but like there's this like one situation where it's diminished very marginally.
For sure. Speaking of versatility, because we get this question a lot with the whole paradigm shift here on Retribution Paladin stats. Okay, this was always a hot topic, especially when we talked about in guides and stuff. It's like the stat for Retribution Paladins were always something like just go sim. Can we like get your view on why is versatility and crit / haste, but more let's say crit if you get a specific threshold on haste? Why is versatility now the main component? Can you like lay it out so everybody knows, so we don't have more arguments in the comments in the future?
Sure. So I think it depends a little bit on whether you're running 10+ strikes or Crusading Strikes.
We'll get to that as well. Yeah. But
in general, for Mastery lost a lot of value because they just nerfed the amount that you get by like 30 to 40%. It was used to have a much higher like conversion of Mastery stat to like the percentage that you get from that stat, if that makes sense. It was 1.6 and it went down to like 1.
Yeah, it was huge.
So Mastery just because it got straight nerfed during the rework, just became much, much worse. Crit is a little bit worse than it used to be because your 10+ slash, which is the second part of 10+ strikes, is always crits, and so does your Hammer of Wrath. And Hammer of Wrath is one of your like biggest abilities inside your cooldown now. So having an ability that always crits, obviously critical strike doesn't benefit that at all. So the other stats relatively are a little bit better compared to crit. Haste is sort of a weird one. It's a little bit because 10+ strikes itself, it has a 1 second GCD instead of just the regular GCD, and it doesn't get reduced by haste. So a large portion of your rotation just isn't impacted by haste at all. And I'm pretty sure that's a bug. I don't know if they've ever talked about it or talked about fixing it or anything, But it basically just means that because 20% of your rotation or whatever is just not affected by haste, the value of haste is just that much less.
Right.
It's not really the same case with Crusading Strikes. If you run that talent instead, haste is a lot better for you because you don't have such a large percentage of your rotation that's just not affected by it at all. And same with crit because you don't have the Templar/crit. So you do still have the Hammer of Wrath auto crits. So crits, it's not amazing, but it's basically just sort of left for Templar Strikes at the very least. All these other stats have just reduced in value relatively, and then versatility is still just as good. And there's a bunch of other effects like the new ring, like trinkets, unused trinkets and stuff that all get affected by verse that don't necessarily get affected by like mastery or like haste. And yeah, it's just all that together just makes versatility pretty good.
All right. Clear, everybody. Something should be like a lot more smoother to understand now.
Yeah, I get it from like a noob perspective. Looking at Crusader Strikes, you would think that the more physical attacks that you get, the better it is. But I would imagine that the Holy Power generation doesn't change either with haste, right? It's not a hasted effect because it's every two.
Crusading Strikes.
Two attacks. I read it as 2 seconds.
Oh no, haste is still good for Crusading Strikes. It's Templar Strikes because the GCD for it is not hasted. Haste is not as good for Templar Strikes.
Is Crusading Strikes still? I think that was fixed. This was also bugged. The Crusading Strike auto attacks.
Yeah, for like the first 2 weeks of the patch or something, it would reset your auto attack timer every time you use an ability.
It was a pain. I tried it. Yeah.
So it was basically unusable for the first 2 weeks of the patch. It was pretty bad.
It would reset.
But, they fortunately fixed that now.
Yeah. It was like imagine an Arms Warrior, right? Playing an Arms Warrior and just having your swing timer.
I thought it reset as in it starts your auto attack again after each ability. You would auto attack again.
Oh, sure.
No. Yeah, you basically just don't get to have any melee abilities. Yeah,
that would be something. But speaking of Crusading Strikes, I've seen a couple of vlogs. I think in Mythic Plus mostly. Some Ret Paladins are picking this up and obviously going with a lot more haste. Although the majority, I think the fan favorite is still Templar Strikes, just because, as you mentioned earlier, it just involves Crusader Strike being a little bit more. First of all, it does more damage, but it has this mini game within it that just feels a lot more involved, right? It's just not like the passive anymore. Where do you stand on this? Do you see maybe further down the line Crusading Strikes taking over and people getting more into haste, or is it super balanced right now with Crusading Strikes and Templar Strikes?
I think at the moment it's very balanced. They're both, right? You can just run whichever one you want in pretty much any content and you will not really notice a massive difference. I think for Mythic Plus especially, a lot of people are leaning towards Crusading Strikes because it has a lot more downtime, naturally in the rotation. Templar Strikes, if you use it, you're pretty much fully GCD locked the entire time for your damage rotation. But with Crusading Strikes, there are way more gaps and people like having those gaps to be able to, cast some healing spells or cast some CC abilities or dispels Hand of Freedoms, all that kind of stuff, right? So they like having free globals for Mythic Plus specifically. In terms of down the line, I think because of how the interactions with secondary stats that I talked about before, I think it's more likely that Crusading Strikes ends up being the default in future patches unless anything gets changed. But at least at the moment, I think they're both really strong. You can play either of them. If anyone, I've seen people trying to argue that one of them's oh no, you had to be playing this content. I just don't think there's a big difference between them. They're both really good, and depending on which one you prefer, you can do totally fine with either.
Would you have to change your stat distribution to play Crusader Strike, or is it equal now, or would it be equal if you swap to a more haste heavy build?
If you have more haste heavy, then Crusading Strikes is more likely to be better for you. But I think it's for the most part, it's you can let your stats sort of dictate which build you play if you want to go that route. But I wouldn't worry too much about the specifics around it. Haste is still pretty good for Templar Strikes. You can still play Crusading Strikes with not that high haste.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be you must have 30% haste to play this build, or this build is unplayable with 30% haste. It's not that or anything.
It's good to hear. People usually, when we see it in our chats and comments, get overly fixated on stat break points. And although there are some specs that probably prefer some stat break points, I was just curious if Red sees this now, especially with this talent, if choosing either one would dictate the kind of set distribution that you want. Obviously, probably one would be better than the other. And personally, I think it's like a cool concept that changing talents can redistribute the gear priority that you have instead of just having, it's just crit first 100% of the time, no matter what talents you pick. I think it probably is a little bit more interesting, but I guess that might not be the same for everybody.
Yeah, it's not like overly dramatic.
Yeah, it's nice when it's balanced and it's not, the end of the world.
I think it's a good example where right now, them being so like similar to each other performance-wise, you can basically, if you prefer like this gameplay or game style, where you have a little bit more breathing room in your rotation to like, do other stuff, you can go ahead and play Crusader Strikes. It's fine. You just have to get used to it because if you played Ret Paladin for the longest time, you're probably used to like always looking out for that last Crusader Strike filler, to generate some holy power, and that's something you have to get used out of because that's
for sure
attacking and stuff. But if you like it, go ahead.
Speaking of.
And you also kind of need to like get a swing time leaper
sure.
as well to actually like track when you're getting the holy power. And that definitely does not appeal to everyone. That's definitely like
Arms has been doing it for
years. Acquired taste kind of thing.
Basically, if you played Arms,
you know
what you need to do.
Speaking of talent choices, I was going to ask you once again, as somebody that's looking to play Ret, what is because I know there's like a bunch of builds and I've looked at some of them. What is the flexibility with the general talent tree when it comes to utility? Because we know that dungeons, especially Mythic Plus right now, there are certain dungeons where, you need this spell, or you need that one thing. Oh, did you bring the class that has the spell? We know that from season 1 as well. In terms of talent flexibility for utility purposes in the Ret. I see that at least the raid and the dungeon builds seem to be able to sacrifice a bunch of stuff, and it's not that bad. But overall, I would imagine it's an improvement from the pre-rework one.
Yeah, there's a couple of extra talents that didn't exist before the rework that are really nice to have. Like you got Unbound Freedom now, which is really great.
Remember this one.
But yeah, like you can swap a lot of the utility talents depending on what you need. You can pick up, Dispels, Blinding Light or Repentance, Turn Evil. Like those, I think what's happened more is that those talents have become way more important this season than they were last season as well. Like I can't think of that many situations last season where a Dispel would have been really useful. But this season there's like half the dungeons have a Dispel. Like there's an entire new affix that you need to Dispel. Like there's just like a lot of extra situations where your utility is actually like very relevant. Same with bops. Like there's a lot more dungeons where bop or like freedom would be useful than they used to be.
So basically, this season was the dungeon pool was like, okay, what is the Paladin utility to look like? All right, freedom, good.
Yeah, that and also like the affix design, like about all the new affixes are just like you have one affix that you can just freedom and get rid of it. You have one affix where you can just like repentance it and turn evil and get rid of it. You have one affix where you can just dispel it and get rid of it. It's like cool, like Ray does all these things. It's great.
We don't want to feel too much like the poster child or the kid from Blizzard's family, but it does feel good, man. It does feel good because let's be honest here. Ret Paladins have never seriously been considered for any type of like serious content for the longest time.
Oh, for sure.
Unless there was
for Mythic Plus
or for any, right?
But anything,
I'm thinking for like
both
in the majority of cases, we can get into this. Okay, so you either consider a Ret Paladin for Mythic Plus because if it had like super giga damage, which we can arguably say sometimes it did have like super giga burst, but then we get into that whole that wasn't really important because it only had it once every 2 minutes and blah blah blah. In raids.
Yeah,
we always talked about what would be the purpose of a Ret Paladin in a raid. Okay, it's a heavy topic in terms of like raid utility. I know, but it has to be said, man.
This is prior to the rework.
Prior to the rework, yeah. This is what I'm saying. Because now we're having a chat with Bolas about how many good tools a Ret Paladin can bring to the table apart from its damage. Okay, that's huge.
There's also a thing that prior to the rework, Ret was a liability, being how squishy it was.
Oh,
you could say that you had.
I wanted to get into that. Yeah,
you had an immune, but it was also. I mean, it wasn't necessarily unreliable, but you couldn't use it as a personal cooldown, especially when we talk about race scenarios. And I think we made this point before. before, where red's main value in a raid prior to the rework, I think, was probably bubble immune. So remember Dosegni or whatever.
I was used for my bubble to immune mechanics. It was nice.
Yeah.
Although I haven't followed religiously all of the race roll first, but I remember back in BFA on Ajara, I don't know who used it. Was it Method? Whoever used on Narclis probably on Reds on the Ajara ads, was one of the only times we've seen Reds, I think, in race roll first. Might have been once or twice since then, for the massive burst. So that's probably what I think Red was known for. Is like, oh, we just burst these in AoE better than any other class, and was doing probably the damage of like 2 or 3 DPSs on it.
There are examples of this from the past where you would see, like, for specific fights or specific scenarios, you would bring Red Paladins in. I just feel now it's I'm not saying this like they're super required, but there's a lot more incentives to bring Red Paladins in any type of content.
Oh, definitely. Even just Retribution or like being effectively a raid buff now, just a massive, bigger reason to bring a Red. But yeah, the defensive stuff is, those changes is probably one of the biggest things for raid viability. Like, it's really hard to like describe how squishy you felt before the rework with, like, I mean, you have an immunity, like bubble is great. It's just, it's not up frequently enough to actually be able to like let you live in most situations. And the same thing with Shield of Vengeance is up, like was up relatively frequently. It was like a 1.5 minute cooldown before the rework. But like
one ability.
Again, it wasn't like,
I mean, it's not
it was like a very small absorb, and it was like, cool. If there's some damage that's happening frequently, this absorb just gets used up and you've got nothing. You're just like, you're sitting there. Yeah. It was, but now like with the passive damage talents that you've got, like all the extra defensive ability, like the reduced cooldown on them. Oh, it feels so much better. It's like, you go from squishiest melee DPS by far to like easily one of the tankiest.
Yeah.
So it should be.
We're from 0 to hero on that department, and that is true. Like we kind of like talked about this in the past as well with Bolas and other folks from the Hammer of Red Discord. But when Blizzard came out and said, "Listen, guys, Red Paladin has one of the highest death rates in all form of combat."
No kidding.
And, you had everybody saying, "But they have bubble," and then Blizzard comes out and say, "Yeah, well, even with the bubble, they still die a lot."
I mean,
for a plate wearing, warrior, light wielding warrior, it just never made sense to be that squishy.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, we always compare. Marcy and I have like a little meme debate going about DK versus Red. We talked about it on mobility side, but mobility aside, DK is turbo tanky. Which, they both had mobility issues in the past, but at least DK had sustained. And talking about immunes, Hunter has had an immune for years on a 3-minute cooldown, and that wasn't enough. And your bubble used to go down as much, 3.5 minutes?
Yeah. Bubble is fine. Bubble is fine, but again, it wasn't really like serious player would consider that, oh yeah, this is our major defensive. It was like the only one. And Shield of Vengeance, as Bolas mentioned, like if you were into some like decent scenario of Mythic Plus or rating, one ability would just pop it off. Like one mediocre ability. I'm not talking like a one shot ability from a PV encounter. Just like one mediocre ability would pop that shield off right off the bat. It was hard. Being alive as a Red Paladin. I always give this example, like from when I was raiding on Red, and our raid dealer was calling, "All right, everybody use defensives." I was looking around. It's like,
when we were raiding in Sepulchre, and I was looking at Marcelian. Middle of the fight, nothing happening. He had his bubble. I was like, man, what do you use bubble for? This is such a waste. And then I picked up my raid and went to the raid. And after the second boss is like, I'm popping my wings, and then I'm dying again. It's like, fuck that, pop bubble. I want to do some damage, man. It was not okay. But now it's like a totally
way better.
Especially with the fight design at the time, there were so many fights that just had constant ticking damage. So if you pressed your Shield of Vengeance like 2 or 3 GCDs in advance to prepare for the damage, the ticking damage would just get rid of it before any of the actual damage you were trying to mitigate happened. It was horrific.
That's also true.
Good stuff.
Okay, so Bolas, is Red Paladin OP broken right now in the game? Honest thoughts. Trick question.
So it's a tough one to tackle. I've seen a lot of people talk about how, like this one of my friends rerolled to Ret, and he's like doubling your own damage in raid. This spec is so broken, that kind of stuff, right? I think it's an interesting topic because there's sort of multiple like levels of metagames that people play in terms of spec balance, like depending on sort of the difficulty of content that you're doing, the type of people you play with. So you can have situations where for like a top end mythic guild, Ret is like not a broken spec. It's like a pretty good spec. You can bring it to your raid. It'll perform pretty well, but it won't be broken by any means. And then you can have like an AOTC guild where Ret's absolutely broken. Like the people playing it are just like, doing so much better than everyone else. Like they're never dying, et cetera, et cetera. And it's sort of a situation resulting from Ret's base damage being quite high, like before you take gear and that kind of stuff into account. So you can have like a low item level Ret who does a lot of damage, and then when they gain item level, they're still doing a lot of damage, but not as much as someone else who gains more item level, like a warlock or something might gain from that gear. So if you're like last year, you were like, everyone in your guild was like 410 item level, your Ret would be absolutely pumping. But if everyone in your guild was like, 420, Ret would be pumping, but like not to the same extent. And then also it's a spec that is, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's quite difficult to play really poorly.
It's less punished.
So yeah, it's hard to get punished. You have execution sentence still, but your execution sentences are longer and they're also way more frequent. So there's not as much of an emphasis on, this particular window, I need to be on the boss. Like this 8-second window every minute, I need to be on the boss. It's like, nah, it's up for 12 seconds every 30 seconds. It's almost up like half the time. If you get a mechanic during that window, you're not completely screwed in your damage like it used to be. And like the specific sequences are less strict. As long as you're just sort of like pressing all your buttons and just, not like wasting holy power horrifically, not like really screwing up your rotation, like you'll do pretty good damage. It's like the baseline to play it is like the skill floor is quite high. So those two factors combined mean that for a lot of people, if you just like pick up Ret, like even if you don't have that great gear, even if you're not playing it that well, you'll still play it to a closer degree compared to someone who plays it really well and has really good gear compared to some other specs where the gap would be much wider.
Can I add another question here? I remember last time that I played a melee with Marcelian in a raid, I think it was still BFN, I was Survival Hunter. And I remember that a lot of issues with uptime on the boss, I could solve with my Survival Hunter by having range with my Aspect of the Eagle. And I know that Ret has gotten a lot of range through Final Verdict, Soul Yards, and there's a bunch of other stuff that increase the range on a lot of other abilities. How important is this range for, obviously, first of all, uptime and what you just mentioned about punishable things, because you can still like there's a lot more it feels like it from outside looking in. There's a lot more flexibility to your rotation and your uptime with your abilities being more accessible because you don't have to just be in melee glued to the boss's butt 100% of the time. So overall, like how did you guys perceive this new increased range in your abilities for Ret?
I think it helped with mobility like the most, to be honest. Like one of the things that people historically sort of thought about Ret is that your mobility is quite bad. Like you've just got Divine Steed and that's basically it to sort of move anywhere. But now if you have situations where you have to like leave the boss for a little bit, other classes they might like charge back in or like Feral Lunge back in or like Shadow Step back in, all that kind of stuff. And you were sort of just like left there, just sort of like slowly walking, trying to get back into melee range of the boss. And now you can still just like press your buttons. Like there's you'll lose a little bit of damage from not having melee uptime instantly, but you can just do your rotation regularly, like almost all of it, Judgment, Hammer of Wrath, Blade of Justice, Templar's Verdict, like all those abilities you can just press like pretty much any, from Evoker range. You're essentially like the second mid-range spec in the game.
Pretty much. It's a good feeling, man. It's a good feeling because compared into the past where you also had to deal with some mechanics like moving out and stuff, and maybe, you wanted to get that extra Templar's Verdict in or whatever, or, that execution sentence was about to finish and, oh man, I still have the Holy Power, but I have to run away or something like that. It feels a lot better now to just, take a step back, and still have a lot of things to press and have the proper range to do it. We can talk about the mobility, how they address mobility for the rework and stuff. I know a lot of people were us included, were really hyped for the Wings of Liberty talent, which never made it in. I don't know how much.
I think that one was always a pipe dream. That one, I think people were huffing copium to think that one was going to get in.
I mean, I always dreamed about that. I'm going to be honest. That was something that it felt really cool to have.
I think it's a cool concept, and if any spec in the game can get it, should probably be Ret. We've seen a lot of things being imported from Diablo, like the spinning hammers, because I think there's Divine Hammer for Ret and Blessed Hammer for Prot. But there are so many other cool Paladini abilities that they could Paladini, like
all right.
Falling Sword from Diablo 3, like the material things from Heroes of Storm that could make Paladin just like Red, like really cool, like this Holy Light Warrior that just uses the light.
You want to talk about Feralian Smite from Legion?
I don't think I remember that one.
That was the one where you would throw the sword and you teleport there.
Yeah, but that was never implemented, right?
No. It was buggy as hell.
But I think even though I would love to see all of that, coming from a DK player more than anything, it felt like Red has received kind of like a DK treatment, where DK is also very, very immobile, but you have this range over the combat space differently. Like Unholy has Clawing Shadows, where you can just do your rotation from range a little bit. You have a lot of procs for Blood and Frost, although not as much as Unholy, where you do a lot of stuff from range as well. And it felt like they're probably going into that direction. Maybe they don't want Reds to zip-zap around the battlefield, but you at least have access to your target from further away. And maybe that's the compromise.
It's a good compromise. I feel it's a good compromise. But I was still set.
Yeah, I was pretty happy with how it ended up for mobility stuff. Like the only real issues I had with mobility before the rework was that Divine Steed was on the GCD, which is awful. Like every time you had to pre-Divine Steed to deal with the mechanic, I'm very glad they took it off.
They took their time removing that shit from the GCD. Goddamn. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of people died because of that GCD. Don't get it twisted. I was a bit sad when they removed the. I forgot the name of it. The judgment speed thing that was like from MOP, I believe. When you judge, when you get a burst of speed. The law thing.
It's still kind of in the game.
Yeah, but like the thing I was like more like, I don't know, attracting. It was just got reminiscent of the past, where you just like had like a super decent burst of speed all the time. I don't know. It's only being 10% now. Definitely makes it a lot worse. And it's tied to a damage talent, which kind of sucks. So you don't really want to take it anyway. It doesn't feel, that it's worth it, right? Like reminiscent, like from how it was in MOB is definitely like the weakest link of it. But I would have loved it to like just be like the initial version of the talent when they first put in the talent tree in it. Because I think that was one of the first iterations they did for Dragonflight, having that in the talent tree somewhere on the left, if I remember correctly. And on the alpha, it felt pretty good. It's like, okay, we're getting somewhere now. But not okay. This is still not nitpicking. I think like the compromises they did for the mobility, specifically the ranged abilities, and also like having the pony out of the GCD, it's great. We were not as gimped or as stuck in places as we were in the past, so it's still good. Do you think, because you did mention that Wings of Liberty, we'll have to address it. You did mention that was like more of like a pipe dream or whatever, but mechanically, okay. So if that would to make it into the game, would that like absolutely break Reds, or would it be something, or where would you see like the cutoff? Okay, you guys get this, but something has to give.
Like a choice now with Divine Steed, maybe.
Yeah, but.
Yeah, I mean, or like with the second charge in Divine Steed, something like that. I don't know. I don't think it would really have that much of an impact apart from just like being able to deal with knockbacks better, because that's like the only other thing where Ret really suffers with mobility is like if knockbacks happen, you've got bubble that can prevent them, and that's it.
We have nothing else.
Wait a minute. I think all melees have something to do with knockbacks. Whereas charge, DK has Death's Advance, Hunter has disengage and grapple and stuff. Rogues have everything. So it feels like
Yep. DH has glide, monks have transcend.
Yeah, I think Red is the last
Ferals
one
have,
to,
like, their
to
kick.
have something to deal with this.
Yeah, it's the only meta that doesn't have like a ability that has like less than like a minute cooldown.
I know on Magmarize, because that's like the biggest pushback.
Oh yeah.
I always bubble that. Just like okay.
I think bot works on that one as well. So you have two abilities that work on that one at least, and you can like gate them as well.
Yeah.
So like there are ways to deal with some of the knockbacks, and especially like the current rate is a lot of knockbacks too, but they're not.
Fight your warlocks; they'll handle your issues for you.
Yeah, I'm just glad that stuff like the Sarkareth knockbacks are not really big. Like they're even on Mythic, they're pretty manageable. Like you can use those abilities to deal with them, but it's nothing like Razageth where you must be this tall to ride the ride.
Yeah, Jesus.
It definitely felt like that.
I think Razageth brought a lot to their attention when it comes to mobility, because when you had a situation where you need evokers to grab people to be able to handle the mechanics, you know that fight has some issues. But it feels like more than ever, they're learning a lot from everything that, let's say we feedback or we don't like, and it feels like they're definitely putting it in, which is a really good time. I actually don't care if Reds become OP, because just know from all of the class guys that we've done over the years, Red was never on top of anything. It was always good. It was a good spec, obviously underestimated a lot of the times, but I feel like now it's getting the proper love. And the good part about this that probably people don't usually take into consideration is that Red is actually a really good design spec. And if there's a big spotlight on it, maybe more classes or specs can get this treatment. Yeah. So far, Red Bonsai.
It's definitely more flexible with the talent builds now, and that's like super huge. As Bolas mentioned, like in the first iteration in Dragonflight, it didn't really change that much. Either had single target or AoE, maybe a 1 or 2 talent switch all around. Now you can go for like, obviously the Giga single target or Giga AoE, but you have like super hybrid builds that are really good for either specific bosses or more specifically catered to dungeons and stuff. Really awesome. And I think that's, that's at least one of the purposes of the new talent tree, right? With the points is like give the flexibility to have, different builds and stuff. So it's cool.
Yeah, that's something I think that a lot of specs don't really have to the same extent. Like it's a lot of specs will have AoE builds or single target builds, but they'll be like, okay, you pick between them, right? Like you have to go down completely one side of the tree to get your AoE build, or you have to go completely down this side of the tree to get your single target build. There's not really that much of an opportunity to just like, okay, you can drop a couple of talents that are, pure single target that maybe don't have a huge impact and pick up a couple of talents that, might improve your cleave quite a bit. Like Ret can definitely do that. A lot of specs basically can't do that at all. Like they've got to just pick one or the other. There's like very little middle ground. Whereas Ret has a ton of middle ground to play around, and you can pick like, I don't know, probably like 8 different talent nodes that you can sort of like swap around, have some variation between single target and AoE, and that's really cool to have.
We used to be like that though, like not being able to move between the talents. So that the rework was a blessing.
Well, yeah, that was just because there was only one set of talents that was any good. You had like stuff like Final Reckoning, where it was like, okay, this is just the best talent in every situation. Like, cool. That's it. That's done.
No flexibility whatsoever. But yeah, just circling back to the question on it's Ret Paladin OP Broken. I think another aspect we need to look at is Ret Paladins tend to be very strong at the beginning of a patch. Like specifically now, they look very strong just because of Bolas mentioned this. The base damage is really high. But once you get further into the patch in the season, a lot more people will get their gear, their sets and whatever. And let me tell you, some specs gain a lot more value from their 4 set than Ret Paladin gets. Yeah, Mr. Warlock, and that's fine. Because the general impression is like when the patch launch and you see like Ret Paladins like doing massive amounts of damage, like, oh my god, it's broken. Yeah. And a lot of it also comes from the PvP scene as well. Reds were like, especially last season, where Reds were like pretty ridiculous there. But overall, further down the line, Red will become much more. I wouldn't say but I would say average, to high maintaining over there. I don't remember what's the percentage we get from the tier set overall.
It's pretty much the same as the last tier. They're both like 3% for each set.
Wait, 3-4-2 piece and 3-4-4 set? Really? Wow.
But I told you about this.
Yeah, the red sets are not very good, but on the bright side, next to the next tier, you basically can't get a worse tier set than this. You know, you can only go up from here.
Yeah, because dude, it felt weird, like when you still had to use your 4 set in Mythic Plus, even if you had like your 2 set, right? Like the new 2 set, you still had to go for the old set until you got the 4 set for the new set.
I imagine they definitely didn't like this, but that sounds like there's a lot of power coming from the class itself, and they didn't really want to nerf red to make the 4 set stronger or something.
Because
without tier set, for instance, my Warlock is way worse in terms of overall performance, but with tier set, I'm like way well. So I would imagine it's also a scaling. Is it safe to call it a scaling difference, at least in this tier?
For like red versus Warlock?
Yeah, I mean, we can
like
use Warlock as one of the other popular specs that's doing really well right now. It can be anything, I guess. I would imagine there's other specs that scale probably better than red from what if the
just the base damage is very high on red.
I remember this because this was Sorry, go on.
And it's also like there's some things like you know, so red's probably just going to use the ring from 10.0.
10.07,
the Onyx Amulet.
Yes.
They're probably going to use that ring for like pretty much this entire patch, whereas a lot of the other classes get like, you know, a huge damage gain from stuff like the class trinket for Warlocks from Neltharion, or like, you know, Shamans use the same one, or, you know, stuff like that where it's okay, like they're after these very specific items that will massively, you know, bump up their damage once they get them, but red doesn't have, I mean, they have the sword from Neltharion, which is good, but it's not, you know, on the same level as those kind of items. And when you start out with like, you know, okay, my best rings for this entire patch are 2 rings that I had equipped in the last raid. Like that's, you know, that sort of limits the potential to improve your damage.
If you have the Seal of the Earth that was chosen, you stick with that, no problem.
Yeah.
And then you go with the Onyx Amulet. It's great. Yeah, I mean, that is like, we talked about this when looking at the Red Paladin guide. It is like more single target focused. It may like the Amulet may drop like for AoE if like you get like super giga high item level ring that, you know, has the proper stats in its sims, but you know it's pretty rare when that will occur. So you're probably gonna be best off with, you know, your old previous season rings, no problemo. And
I think for Crusading Strikes builds, they're more likely to end up swapping to like some kind of like, you know, crafted socketed max item level ring later on in the season kind of thing, but probably not for a little bit.
Is this also like the amulet and everything? Is this also a byproduct of the fact that you're getting so much verse? I would imagine versatility would increase the procs of all of this.
Yep. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And also the like Irenog ring having a massive amount of verse on it too is also, you know, feedbacks into that.
Yeah, because I imagine they mentioned that they don't want this to be the case. They've nerfed, for instance, for Balanced Druid, they've nerfed the Vault tier set because it was going to be way stronger than anything they were going to get in 10.1, just so that they make sure that the 10.1 gear, although the tier set, would be a relevant upgrade. So I don't know why Red has kind of got under the radar, but I would imagine that they're...
Well, it's not just Red. There's like a bunch of melee specs that are all going to use the ring for basically the entire patch. I think every rogue spec still uses it. I think Windwalker and potentially DH also still use them. Don't quote me on that 100%, but there's at least like a handful of other melee specs that are basically permanently going to use the ring. I think all the tank specs, or at least a large number of the tank specs, are also just going to use the amulet for a long time. So I definitely wouldn't be surprised to see them nerf it in like 10.1.5 or something like that. But at least for now, you know, still pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty much the story of it. I mean, for to some extent, you know, it feels kind of bad because you want the new toys to put on yourself. On the other hand, you don't really have to like, you know, get too much into like farming specific stuff if you have the previous season ones, and it's still.
I mean, it's kind of nice to have like, oh, this is so good for me. I just have this for now, but then you probably have new reds that have never done Vault, because obviously this is usually the balance that they try to strive for, because they don't want past gear to be relevant. Probably most for the players coming into the spec, considering that we're promoting playing alts and alt friendly stuff, and you never did the prior content, and now you have to do the prior content to get it. So I would imagine that they're probably aware of this, because they had initially a post where they said that they don't want Onyx amulets to be better than all the rings that we get in 10.1, but halfway through 10.1.7, I think, they made a post like, okay, listen, they're still gonna be good, so it's gonna be good for a while, but I would imagine that they will nerf it in, I don't know, 10.
Yeah, probably in 10.1.5.
Yeah.
We'll get some juicy stuff.
I think they see their goal was something like they want it to be still strong for progression at the start of this patch, but then they wanted people to sort of replace them, as they gear up. And I think that's probably the case for most specs that they're going to do that, or they have done that. It's just like the way that the ring was designed, it had such a high difference in terms of value for different classes. Like for some classes, they didn't even equip it at all last patch. Even, they just wanted the stats more than anything else. And then for some classes, it was just like, okay, we're never unequipping this entire expansion. There's never anything that can possibly compete with this kind of thing. It's it's really hard to sort of balance it for both ends of that spectrum.
True.
For sure.
But yeah, up until folks from the chat, if you have any questions for Bolas regarding Ret Paladin, now is the time to throw them in. Up until people think about questions or whatever, just gonna ask Bolas is there right now, even nitpicking, is there a major issue that you see with Ret Paladins currently, Bolas? Even if you want to nitpick, it's fine. Not that much.
I'd like to see the bugs fixed. That's probably the thing.
Okay, so let's take into account once again what are the prominent bugs. We talked about the final broken, the execution sentence versatility bug, right? That's one.
Yeah.
What else?
That is the big one. That's the really big important one. There's a couple of really minor ones there's a couple of things that Crusader Strikes doesn't always work with. I think it's not rocking Imperium power at all anymore. But the big one really want to see fixed is just the execution sentence versatility bug.
I think it's been going on for quite a while. Hopefully they will do it in either a new wave of tuning, because they are pretty fast at that, or the sooner the better. I remember the Force set having a bug. What was it? The Judgment debuff. I think that's fixed though, right?
There was one where a couple weeks ago where if you used Hammer of Wrath and it cleaved, it would use both your charges of the ability.
Oh, right. Yeah. You could see both charges. Yeah. But that fixed, right? This is
that one got fixed pretty quickly.
That's no problem at all.
Yeah, it's the execution sentence bug and the weird GCD stuff. There's a bunch of abilities that don't have hasted GCDs, like 10+ strikes, that I think would be nice to get those fixed to sort of make haste not have such a weird value for the spec anymore. That'd be nice.
Better get going, Blizzard. We have a question from Kai. Do you know or seen anything in the Holy rework that will impact retribution or protection in a big way?
I don't think so. I don't think they've changed anything about the class tree. I think all the stuff that I've seen so far is just Holy specific stuff. So I don't think anything about that is going to have any impact on Ret, as far as I know, at least.
I haven't seen.
Could see more.
I haven't seen anything in the general talent trees. I know there's one thing I know. Holy doesn't have access to Unbound Freedom.
Yeah,
that's the only thing that
whenever something would impact the other spec, it seems like with Paladin they've just slightly reworked the general class tree for the other spec, so kind of reflect what they want that other spec to do as opposed to the other ones. Yeah. So if that ever becomes an issue, they can just make it exclusive to Holy in that case, or to Red in this case. Yeah.
Well, Prot also has Unbound Freedom. I think it was just a situation where Holy Paladin has always been the default Paladin spec, and they wanted to sort of have stuff where you weren't just oh, we need to bring Paladins for this mechanic. We'll just bring more Holy Paladins. Where that gives them a situation where builds can actually go, okay, we want to bring a Ret Paladin or a Prot Paladin instead this time.
Okay, all cool. Right. We have another question here from Cootie. Which second stat do you prefer to stack, or going all stats on the same level? Or which prio do you think it's worth? First of all, Sim, but I'll let Bolas say that. I think it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, Sim is definitely the best answer. of to figure it out, because it can depend a lot on the gear that you already have, right? Like secondary stats don't exist in a vacuum. They're adding or taking away from gear that you already have whenever you equip a new piece. They're like, say you've got like a crit mastery piece equipped and you equip a haste reverse piece because you're like, oh, these stats are good. You're losing other stats to gain those stats. None of that is like a thing where just gaining haste first equals good. If you have to default to any stat, then verse is probably the easiest one to default to, but it's going to be contextual depending on your character.
Yeah, there's always a big discussion to be had about Ret Paladin stats, and I know it's like pretty template answer, but it is the best way to like see what works for your specific Ret is to like just go on raidbots.com and sim your character, because it really depends on what type of gear you have on. Do you think they'll ever make Sword and Shield Ret viable? This is from Starbuck. Interesting.
Probably not. Like, I think it doesn't really make sense, sort of, like flavor-wise. Like, okay, I'm like a plate wearer. I'm wielding a two-handed weapon, and then now I'm wielding a one-handed weapon and a shield, and I'm still doing the same damage. Like, it doesn't. To me, that doesn't really make like much thematic sense. At least if you're like a Fury Warrior going from like two-handers to two one-handers, you can go like, okay, you're attacking more frequently, or like, the two-handers are unwieldy, so you're missing more, that kind of thing. But for Ret, for lore-wise, it just doesn't make sense. But mechanically as well, I just don't think it fits like how Ret functions. Like, it just doesn't. There's no real need to do that.
Plus,
I think Ret works pretty well as a two-handed spec.
Yeah, well, fantasy-wise, I think it would kind of hinder the Red's fantasy a little bit. Plus, they did that. The closest that we've had that was in, I think, Warlords of Draenor when I played it. Prot Warrior had Gladiator stance, which made it that you had a sword and a shield and you did a lot of damage. They didn't like that from a tuning perspective. And if we're going to use the last couple of years as of any indication, Warrior is another example for this, where they made One-Hander Fury, again, really good. Now, you have issues with looting the items, because when you make a spec be able to receive loot, both two-handers and one-handers, you're going to have a gearing nightmare where, for instance, as Frost Decay in Shadowlands, I wanted to get one-handers, but because two-handers was also a thing, I was only looting two-handers, so I could never play dual wield and things like that. So I don't think...
If I ever opened my vault as Ret and got a shield in it, I would be
that's the thing, because it would take away from a potential 200 that you could loot. And I think they've tested it. Yeah. The examples are, in terms of this, is negative, and unless they can swap or rethink the loot specialization system in the game so you can target the kind of gear that you want. So unless they fix that first, I hardly see this being a case. Not to mention that even when it did become slightly a case, it was a little bit weird in terms of the tuning. So... it's spicy.
We have another, I think, a stat-related question from Legolas. I'm hoping you can hear me. Okay, man. Okay, so here's the thing. Since the raid is more single-target centric, I have seen the template from Blood Mallet say 3,480 rating for verse crit haste. For Crusading Strikes, I believe. For Crusading, I became a fan, and it works for me a little better than stats change more. Did the stats change? I don't understand the question. So, do the stats change more, or do they remain the same?
For Crusading Strikes?
I think it's something that we talked about earlier, whether or not
he was not or Temple he was not here.
Yeah, like haste and crit are like a little bit better if you run Crusading Strikes, but it's not like a massive, change in stats where it's like, oh, you only want versatility with Templar Strikes and you don't want any versatility with Crusading Strikes. It's just sort of, now these stats are just marginally better than they were, without this talent. You don't have to, rework your entire gear to be able to run it, but you might find that getting a little bit more of them might be better for you.
Yeah, so it's not, as we mentioned in the beginning, it's not overly dramatic when it comes to like the stats you have to change in order to play Crusading Strikes. I mean, if you love it, just go ahead, man. Yeah, so you guys were talking about the sword and shield thing. There's also like Prot has like basically all of the abilities themed around shield and stuff. I don't know how they would like put that into red.
Yeah, I think people want the gladiator style.
Yeah, I get the fantasy of it. Sure,
I don't think it fits red. If it ever comes, it's probably gonna come to warrior before it ever comes to red. Since I mean, red is pretty iconic with the two-hander.
But can you see red paladins wielding two-handers?
Well, I see people running with two corrupted Ashbringers, but that's the thing, because I feel like in terms of fantasy, if this is ever gonna become relevant, there are probably in terms of a two-hander DPS class out there, red is probably more popular than even arms is. So and if warrior is not getting a one-hander sword and board, then I don't think red is gonna be considering that. And when you think of red, you think corrupted Ashbringer slapping big holy strikes down and exploding everything in holy damage. So that's kind of where I guess it is.
The only thing I could ever see them doing is potentially like a two-hander plus a shield as a combo, as like a talent or something. But even then, that'd be
okay.
Kind of
I can see the appeal of it, definitely. Okay,
I mean it's
but it's I think it would underlie so many mechanics. It's gonna be Okay, we have another one here from KK85. So I have 4-piece and Simbot tells me for M+ to go mastery versatility. I'm already at 24%, but my haste and verse are under 20%. Is this intended?
At 24% mastery, that's not that much mastery. So it's not like it's getting a little bit more would probably be fine. Mastery tends to be a little bit better on AoE than it is on single target, even despite the rework nerf to it. So yeah, following that advice seems kind of fine. I wouldn't worry about your haste or verse being below 20%. It's not a really tiny amount.
Oh yeah, it's good. I mean, I think it's a very okay. That's all depending on each character, but I think somewhere around 20% haste verse, that's pretty fine. I do feel like 24% mastery is pretty lowish. But that's all. If the sim tells you need more mastery, then you go for the mastery. It's fine. We talked about the mastery. It has been nerfed with the rework. It's fine. What was it? 40% lower? Something like that. So it's not as valuable
35
as it was in the past. But if you have low amounts, this is the thing with sims, right? Like whenever you have a lower amount of specific stat, it will always try to bump it up to be on the appropriate levels, depending once again on what type of gear you have on. What was this? To be honest, okay, that was the Mog. Okay, a question from Kai Gill. How do you feel about other races getting paladins?
Yeah, there's definitely some that I feel like it would make sense to. Like we had a couple of Night Elf Paladin followers in Legion in the class hall, and for some reason I don't know why they added 2 of them, and then Night Elves still haven't been able to be Paladins for 6 years after that. And I was expecting that to happen the next expansion. But yeah, I think Night Elves would make sense. Let me think. What else would actually
I'll tell you what makes sense. Our chat: Vulpira Paladin, Undead Paladin. Everybody's a Paladin.
Everybody can be a Warlock. Anybody can be a Paladin. Let's go.
No, but seriously.
I mean, I wouldn't hate just removing all race class restrictions if they wanted to go that way.
That's looking like it's gonna get that way
eventually. I think. Yeah, I feel like the game's just sort of going to get to the point where that just makes sense to do that regardless. It's just sort of making sure they all have the animations and stuff for them correct.
They're slowly moving to a world.
Well, they're not going to stop at all races mages, all races warlocks. They're eventually going to get there anyway.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. But if you can do Lightforged Draenei warlocks, then I don't really see why you can't do orc paladins.
I recognize with different classes how haste seems worse the lower you are on haste, and sims better once you reach a certain amount of up till some break bracket. This was not a question. Yeah, Pandaren Paladin. Yeah, sure, Lego. You're gonna do all your Paladins. Pandaren.
That bouncy panda weaving that Ashbringer around.
All right. So if there's
why not?
No more other questions, I guess
we can wrap it up.
We can definitely recommend you guys to if you want to learn about Paladin, check Bolas Wowhead guide. It's going to be linked in the description, as well as his Twitter. You can definitely see some red stuff going on over there. And also make sure to check out the Hammer of Red Discord. It's also pretty active over there. Specifically, please check the pinned posts in the Hammer of Red Discord. There's a lot of people have a lot of questions, but most of the answers are already there, just pinned. So make sure to check that out. Bolas, always a pleasure to have you on, man.
Thank you, man.
A blast talking about.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Always, man. Spec in World of Warcraft. Period. After the rework.
Spread the red love. No, it is one of the better specs, and it's been nice having this very pleasant and positive energy out there. Hopefully, we can dispel some misconceptions about Red from the community, and people can just enjoy the spec, man.
Yes. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. The stream will continue. Catch you on the next podcast with who knows what spec we're going to have talking about. Have a good one, Bolas. Thanks for joining, man.
All right.
Take it easy,
Thanks.
man. Bye.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.